Sarah Bennett smoothed the wrinkles from her sensible navy blazer as she glanced at the antique clock on her office wall. Her 4 o'clock appointment was 15 minutes late, unusual for her typically punctual clients. The soft autumn light filtered through the blinds of her Manhattan office, highlighting the numerous diplomas and certificates that lined the walls, testament to years of dedication to her field. At 38, Sarah Bennett had established herself as one of New York's most respected psychologists, with a thriving private practice and a tenured position at Columbia University. Her professional achievements were impressive by any standard, except perhaps her family's. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her youngest sister, Madison. "Don't forget Mom's birthday dinner tonight. Wear something nice for once. Connor's bringing the photographer from Vogue. Maybe borrow something from Olivia, if you don't have anything suitable." Sarah exhaled slowly, practicing the same mindfulness techniques she taught her clients. Madison, at 32, was married to Connor Williams, heir to a media empire. Their wedding had been featured in every major publication, their Manhattan penthouse regularly appeared in architectural magazines, and their Instagram perfect life gathered hundreds of thousands of followers. Her other sister, Olivia, 35, had married a prominent surgeon whose family practically owned half the hospitals in New England. Between them, Sarah's sisters had crafted lives that looked impeccable from the outside, the kind their mother had always envisioned for her daughters. And then there was Sarah, the eldest, the spinster, the one whose achievements were acknowledged with polite nods before conversations quickly turned to her sisters' charity galas and vacation homes. The one who'd chosen a career over marriage, independence over conformity, substance over appearance, choices that her family interpreted as failure rather than success. Sarah opened her laptop to review her notes on her next client, a new referral who had been reluctant to seek therapy until his assistant apparently threatened to quit if he didn't address his anger management issues. Alexander Rothschild, CEO of Rothschild Investments, was known as a brilliant but ruthless businessman whose temper was legendary in financial circles. Before she could read further, a commotion from the waiting room interrupted her thoughts. Sarah heard her assistant Janet's voice rising in protest, followed by a deep, authoritative male voice that seemed accustomed to overriding objections. The door to her office swung open without a knock. A tall man with dark, slightly disheveled hair stood in the doorway, his tailored suit worth more than Sarah's monthly rent. His tie was loosened, his expression a mixture of annoyance and discomfort, and his intense blue eyes surveyed her office with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to making swift judgments. "Dr. Bennett?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Sarah rose from her chair, maintaining her professional composure despite the intrusion. "Yes. And you must be Alexander Rothschild. You're 20 minutes late." "Traffic," he replied dismissively, as if the concept of time applied differently to him. He glanced around her office, taking in the comfortable furnishings, the overflowing bookshelves, the distinct lack of pretension. "My assistant insisted I come here, said if I didn't get therapy she'd quit. Good assistants are hard to find, so here I am." Sarah gestured to the comfortable chair across from hers. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Rothschild." Alexander Rothschild, billionaire investor, business mogul, and one of New York's most eligible bachelors, awkwardly lowered himself into the chair, looking like a lion trapped in a too-small cage. The man whose face regularly appeared on the cover of business magazines shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to being in environments he didn't control. "So how does this work?" he asked abruptly. "I tell you about my childhood, and you tell me I have issues with my father. Because we could save time, I definitely have issues with my father." Sarah maintained her professional smile. "Actually, therapy is a collaborative process. We'll work together to identify patterns that might be causing distress in your life and develop strategies to address them." "My assistant says I have anger issues," he stated flatly. "And what do you think? I think people are incompetent and I have appropriate responses to incompetence." Sarah suppressed a smile. "I see. And how's that working for you?" For the first time, Alexander seemed taken aback, as if no one had ever asked him that question before. He studied her face with new interest, noticing her clear hazel eyes that held no trace of intimidation or awe, just professional curiosity and a hint of amusement. "Not great," he finally admitted, his voice losing some of its edge. I'm on my 5th assistant this year. My board members communicate through intermediaries. And apparently, I made an intern cry last week. Though in my defense, he brought me cold coffee. Cold coffee. Clearly a capital offense, Sarah remarked dryly. To her surprise, Alexander's lips twitched into what might have been the beginning of a smile. You know, you're the first person who's spoken to me like that in years. Like what? Like I'm just a regular person who needs to get his act together. Sarah leaned forward slightly. In this room, that's exactly who you are, Mr. Rothschild. Not a billionaire, not a CEO, just someone trying to figure things out, like everyone else. As their session continued, Sarah began to see glimpses of the man behind the imposing facade. Alexander Rothschild was brilliant, driven, and utterly isolated, surrounded by people but devoid of real connections. He'd built walls so high that he himself couldn't remember how to lower them. "Let me ask you something," Sarah said after they'd discussed his work habits. "When was the last time you did something purely for enjoyment? Not for business, not for networking, just because it brought you pleasure?" Alexander stared at her, genuinely puzzled. "I enjoy closing deals. That's work. I'm talking about hobbies, interests, activities that have nothing to do with Rothschild investments." He shifted in his chair, suddenly looking younger, almost vulnerable. "I used to sail before my father got sick and I took over the company. Haven't been on a boat in 7 years, I guess." "Why not?" "No time." The answer came automatically, practiced. "No time or no permission?" Sarah asked gently. "Sometimes we get so caught up in who we think we should be that we forget who we are." Alexander's expression shifted, something flickering behind those intense eyes. "That's actually insightful. I do have a PhD for a reason," Sarah replied with a small smile. By the end of their first hour, Sarah had established clear boundaries for their therapeutic relationship and scheduled a follow-up appointment. What she didn't anticipate was how Alexander would stare at her thoughtfully as he rose to leave. "You're different," he stated, as if making a discovery. "Everyone wants something from me. You just want me to be better." "That's my job," Sarah replied. "It's refreshing," he said, then added with unexpected vulnerability, "See you next week, Dr. Bennett." After he left, Sarah sat quietly, trying to process the session. Something about Alexander Rothschild had touched a chord in her. His loneliness resonated with her own, though their circumstances couldn't be more different. She shook the thought away quickly. He was a patient, nothing more. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. That evening, as predicted, her mother's birthday dinner was an exercise in subtle humiliation. Sarah sat at the elaborately decorated table in her parents' Upper East Side home, wearing her one designer dress, a purchase from 3 years ago that she saved for such occasions. "Sarah, darling," her mother Elizabeth cooed with practiced concern, "Olivia's friend Richard is divorcing that dreadful woman. He's a partner at Goldman now. Shall I arrange a dinner?" "Mom, I've told you, I'm not interested in setups," Sarah replied, taking a larger sip of wine than she intended. Madison, resplendent in a couture gown that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, exchanged knowing looks with Olivia. "At some point, Sarah, you might want to consider compromise. 38 isn't getting any younger." "What Madison means," Olivia added with faux kindness, "is that there's more to life than work. Look at us. We have fulfilling marriages and careers." Sarah bit back the response she wanted to give, that Olivia hadn't practiced medicine since her engagement, and Madison's career consisted mainly of being photographed at charity events. Instead, she smiled tightly. "I'm quite happy with my life as it is." "Of course you are, dear," her mother said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "We just worry about you, all alone in that apartment with your cat." "Freud is excellent company," Sarah defended. "He doesn't offer unsolicited advice about my life choices." Her father, Thomas Bennett, a retired cardiothoracic surgeon, cleared his throat. "Leave her be, Elizabeth. Sarah's accomplishments speak for themselves. Not everyone measures success by the same metrics." Sarah shot her father a grateful look. Though he rarely intervened in these discussions, when he did, his support meant everything. The conversation mercifully shifted to Olivia's upcoming anniversary trip to the Maldives, but Sarah couldn't help noticing the pitying glances cast her way throughout the evening. By the time dessert was served, she was mentally calculating how soon she could leave without causing offense. "So, Sarah, Connor, Madison's husband, called from across the table, his voice carrying that distinctive tone of someone about to say something deliberately provocative. "I hear you've got a new high-profile patient. Rothschild, isn't it?" Sarah stiffened. "I don't discuss my patients, Connor. You know that." "Come on. Everyone's talking about his latest meltdown at the Chamberlain merger. Threw a water pitcher at the wall, I heard. Guy's unhinged but brilliant. Worth what, 20 billion? "Ethics aren't contingent on net worth," Sarah replied coolly. "And confidentiality applies to everyone." Madison rolled her eyes. "Always so serious, Sarah. It's just family." "It's also my professional reputation and my patient's privacy," Sarah countered, standing up. "I should get going. Early client tomorrow." Later that night, Sarah returned to her cozy apartment in Chelsea, greeted enthusiastically by her orange tabby, Freud. As she kicked off her uncomfortable heels and changed into her favorite worn sweatpants, she felt the familiar weight of loneliness descend. It wasn't that she regretted her choices. She loved her work, her independence, the life she'd built. But on nights like these, after being reminded of what her family considered failure, she wondered if something was wrong with her for not wanting what her sisters had. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled on her comfortable, if slightly shabby couch, scrolling through her phone. A news notification caught her eye. Rothschild heir spotted entering therapist's office after boardroom meltdown. Sarah groaned. Of course someone had photographed him. Privacy was a luxury even billionaires couldn't afford in New York. "At least I have you," she murmured to Freud, who purred contentedly as she scrolled through Netflix, searching for something to distract her from thoughts of perfect marriages and a certain intense-eyed billionaire who had unexpectedly occupied her mind since their meeting. The following week, Alexander arrived 5 minutes early for his session, another surprise. He seemed more at ease, though the intensity that radiated from him like heat from a furnace remained unchanged. "I went sailing," he announced without preamble as he sat down. Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Did you? How was it?" "Terrible," he admitted with a rueful smile that transformed his face, making him look years younger. "I was rusty, it was cold, and I nearly capsized. But then it was wonderful. For 3 hours I wasn't Alexander Rothschild, CEO. I was just me. No phone, no assistance, no one needing decisions." "That sounds like progress," Sarah observed, genuinely pleased. "It was your suggestion," he pointed out. "First good advice I've gotten in years that wasn't about stock portfolios or acquisitions." They settled into the session, discussing his work habits, his tendency to expect perfection from others while driving himself even harder, the emptiness of his personal life. Alexander was surprisingly insightful about his own flaws, once he stopped defending them as necessary for success. "My father built this company from nothing," he explained, his voice taking on a harder edge. "He was ruthless, uncompromising, expected the same from me. Anything less than perfection was failure." "And now you perpetuate that cycle with your employees," Sarah noted. Alexander frowned. "I expect excellence, is that wrong?" "Excellence isn't the issue, it's the cost. What happens when someone fails to meet your standards? They're fired, or reassigned." He shrugged. "Business isn't for the weak." "Is that your father talking or you?" Sarah asked gently. The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Alexander fell silent, his expression shifting from defensive to thoughtful. "I'm not sure I know the difference anymore," he finally admitted. As their session concluded, Alexander lingered, seeming reluctant to leave the one space where he was treated as a person rather than a power broker. "Same time next week?" he confirmed. Sarah nodded, already making notes in her calendar. "And perhaps try another sale in the meantime, even if it's terrible again." His smile was small but genuine. "Doctor's orders? Consider it a prescription for perspective." After he left, Sarah found herself thinking about Alexander more than she should. There was something compelling about him beyond his obvious physical attributes, a vulnerability beneath the armor, an authenticity beneath the performance. She recognized in him the same struggle she faced herself, the weight of expectations versus the desire for genuine fulfillment. The thought troubled her. Personal interest in a patient was the first step toward compromising professional boundaries. Sarah had always prided herself on her ethical standards. She couldn't afford to blur those lines, especially not with someone as complex and potentially volatile as Alexander Rothschild. Yet when her phone buzzed with another text from her mother, another set-up attempt with another suitable man, Sarah found herself comparing these faceless candidates to the very unsuitable man who had just left her office. None of them measured up to his intensity, his intelligence, his unexpected moments of vulnerability. "This is transference in reverse," she muttered to herself, recognizing the psychological pattern where therapists project their own needs onto patients. Absolutely not happening. She resolutely turned her attention to her next client's notes, pushing thoughts of Alexander Rothschild firmly aside. Professional boundaries would remain intact. She wouldn't allow anything else. 3 weeks into Alexander Rothschild's therapy, Sarah began to notice concerning patterns, not just in her patient, but in her own reactions to him. Alexander was making progress, albeit reluctantly. He'd stopped making interns cry, had actually learned his assistant's name, Melissa, and was working on what Sarah called his pause button, the ability to stop and consider his responses before reacting. He'd gone sailing twice more, started reading fiction again, a passion he'd abandoned in college, and even attended a jazz performance alone, simply because he enjoyed the music. The problem was that he had also developed an unmistakable interest in Sarah that went far beyond the therapeutic relationship. It began subtly. Compliments on her insights, questions about her weekend, an unusual attentiveness to her coffee preferences when he noticed her travel mug. "You take it with lavender and oat milk," he observed during their 4th session. Unusual combination. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Rothschild, Alexander, please. After all this time, formality seems excessive. As your therapist, maintaining professional boundaries is important," she explained. "And speaking of boundaries, I've noticed you asking more personal questions lately." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see right through her professional facade. "You're very observant." "It's my job to observe. Is it also your job to avoid the question?" He smiled slightly. "I'm not the only one with deflection tactics, Dr. Bennett." "Transference," Sarah explained, redirecting the conversation. "It's common for clients to develop feelings for their therapists. It's not personal. It's a projection based on the intimate nature of our conversations." Alexander's expression shifted, amusement giving way to something more genuine. "With all due respect to your expertise, Dr. Bennett, that's nonsense." "Excuse me? I'm attracted to you because you're intelligent, straightforward, and utterly unimpressed by me. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" He gestured vaguely toward the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. "Out there, people either want something from me or are intimidated by me. You're neither." Sarah maintained her composed expression despite the flutter in her stomach. "Mr. Rothschild, maintaining professional boundaries is essential for effective therapy. If you're developing personal feelings, we should discuss referring you to another therapist." "I don't want another therapist," he stated flatly. "I want—" He paused, seeming to catch himself. "I'll respect your boundaries. For now." The "for now" lingered in Sarah's mind long after the session ended. That weekend, Sarah found herself thinking about Alexander's words as she graded papers at her favorite coffee shop near Columbia. The autumn afternoon was crisp and golden, students and professors crowding the cozy space that served as her Saturday sanctuary. Here, away from her office and family, she could simply be another academic among many. She was deep in thought, red pen poised over a particularly ambitious thesis on trauma responses, when a familiar figure appeared at her table, setting down a fresh cup of her preferred drink, a lavender latte with oat milk. "Fancy meeting you here," Alexander said, sliding into the seat across from her without invitation. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Rothschild, this is inappropriate. How did you even know I'd be here?" He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I may have asked Melissa to find out your regular spots. For what it's worth, she told me this was a terrible idea." "Your assistant was right," Sarah replied, closing her laptop. "This crosses professional boundaries." Alexander didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a moment to observe her in this setting. Without her professional armor, dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical bun. She looked younger, more relaxed, and absolutely beautiful. "What if I wasn't your client anymore?" he asked suddenly. Sarah blinked. "What?" I could find another therapist. Then there would be no ethical conflict. That's not how this works, Sarah said, gathering her things. The power dynamics don't simply disappear. Besides, you need consistency in your therapy, not disruption because of whatever this is. Alexander watched her with that intense focus that made her feel like the only person in a crowded room. This is attraction, Sarah. Simple human connection. Something we both seem to be lacking, from what I can tell. The use of her first name shouldn't have affected her, but it did. Mr. Rothschild, Alexander, please, at least outside the office. This is inappropriate and I need to go. As she stood, he gently touched her wrist, the brief contact sending an unwelcome jolt through her. I apologize for ambushing you, but I'm not sorry for being interested in you. Sarah left quickly, disturbed by her own reaction more than his presence. She should have been purely annoyed, possibly even concerned. Instead, she found herself fighting an unwelcome sense of flattery. The rest of her weekend was disrupted by thoughts of Alexander. On Sunday evening, she called her mentor and former supervisor, Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, for advice. He's showing classic signs of transference, Sarah explained, pacing her living room while Freud watched with feline indifference. But he's also extremely perceptive and self-aware. He claims it's genuine attraction, not projection. And what do you think? Eleanor asked, her voice calm through the speakerphone. Sarah hesitated. I think I'm not entirely objective anymore. Ah. The single syllable contained volumes of understanding. Counter-transference. Maybe, Sarah admitted reluctantly. He's fascinating, Eleanor. Brilliant, complex, surprisingly vulnerable beneath all that arrogance. And yes, objectively attractive. The damaged, powerful man is an archetypal attraction, Eleanor noted, especially for healers. The question is, what will you do about it? The ethical thing, obviously. Refer him to another therapist. Is that what he wants? No, he's resistant to the idea. And what do you want, Sarah? The question hung in the air. What did she want? Professionally, she wanted to continue helping a patient who was making progress. Personally, that was more complicated. I want to maintain my professional integrity, she finally said. Then you know what you need to do, Eleanor replied gently. The following week, Sarah prepared herself to have a difficult conversation with Alexander. She would recommend several excellent colleagues, explain the ethical necessity of the referral, and maintain firm boundaries. To her surprise, Alexander entered her office with an unusual sense of calm. He handed her a folder before sitting down. What's this? Sarah asked, opening it to find transfer paperwork. I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Jason Michaels, Alexander explained. He comes highly recommended for executives with issues similar to mine. Sarah stared at him, caught off guard. I was going to suggest a referral today. I know, Alexander said with a small smile. You're ethical to a fault, Sarah. It's one of the things I admire about you. I thought I'd save you the discomfort of the conversation. That's considerate. I'm learning, he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Thanks to you, our sessions have been invaluable. Sarah nodded, feeling strangely disappointed despite knowing this was the right decision. I'm glad you found them helpful. Dr. Michaels is excellent. He'll have dinner with me, Alexander interrupted. Sarah blinked. What? Friday night. Now that I'm no longer your patient, there's no ethical conflict. He leaned forward slightly. Unless you're not interested, in which case I'll respectfully withdraw and stop ambushing you in coffee shops. Sarah should have refused immediately. It was still too soon after the therapeutic relationship, still ethically questionable. Instead, she found herself asking, why me? You could literally have anyone. Alexander's expression softened into something startlingly vulnerable. Because you see me, not my money, not my reputation, just me. And because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you told me cold coffee wasn't a capital offense. Despite herself, Sarah smiled at the memory. It's still complicated. Life generally is, he acknowledged, especially the worthwhile parts. Sarah considered him, this complex, difficult, fascinating man who had walked into her office a month ago radiating anger and isolation, and who now looked at her with genuine hope. One dinner, she found herself saying, as two people who are no longer in a therapeutic relationship, nothing more. Alexander's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Nothing more, he agreed, though his eyes suggested he was already planning for much more indeed. Little did Sarah know that this agreement would set in motion events that would upend her carefully ordered life in ways she could never have anticipated. The following evening, Sarah found herself staring at her closet with uncharacteristic indecision. She, who had never particularly cared about fashion, suddenly found her wardrobe woefully inadequate for dinner with a billionaire. After trying on and discarding nearly everything she owned, she settled on a simple black dress that her sisters would consider boring, but that she knew flattered her figure. She wore her hair down, applied makeup with more care than usual, and even splurged on a taxi rather than taking her usual subway. Alexander had suggested meeting at Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Sarah arrived to find he had reserved a private dining room, filled with an excessive arrangement of white orchids and lit with the soft glow of candles. "This is a lot," she said, taking in the opulent setting as a sommelier hovered nearby with an outrageously expensive bottle of champagne. Alexander frowned slightly. "You don't like it?" Sarah considered how to respond. The old Sarah would have politely pretended to be impressed to spare his feelings. But the woman who had spent weeks encouraging Alexander to be authentic deserved the same honesty from herself. "It's beautiful," she acknowledged, "but I feel like I'm on display. I'm more of a hole-in-the-wall pizza place person, honestly." To her surprise, Alexander immediately stood and offered his hand. "Then let's go find a pizza place." "But your reservation is just a reservation," he finished for her. "I'd rather have good company in a place you enjoy than perfect food in a setting that makes you uncomfortable." They ended up at a tiny Italian restaurant in the village, with checkered tablecloths and wine served in juice glasses. Alexander looked comically out of place in his bespoke suit, but the genuine smile on his face as Sarah explained why New York pizza was superior to Chicago deep dish made something warm unfurl in her chest. "You're easy to please," he observed, watching her savor a simple margarita slice. "No, I'm just clear about what actually makes me happy," she corrected. "My sisters think happiness comes from designer labels and social media approval. I think it comes from authenticity." Alexander studied her thoughtfully. "Your sisters, they're the ones with the perfect marriages." Sarah nodded, surprised he remembered that detail from their sessions. "Madison and Olivia. They did everything right. Married young, married rich, maintained picture-perfect lives. And you're the family disappointment?" She winced. "Harsh, but essentially accurate. The spinster academic who prioritized career over marriage." Alexander leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You know what I see. Someone who refused to compromise, who built a life based on her values rather than external expectations. It's the opposite of disappointing. It's admirable." The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's carefully constructed defenses begin to crack. For so long she told herself she didn't care about her family's judgment, that she was content with her choices. But having someone not just accept, but admire those choices was unexpectedly moving. Their conversation flowed easily from there, about books they'd read, places they'd traveled, the weight of family expectations. Alexander revealed more about his strained relationship with his father, the pressure of inheriting a financial empire, the loneliness of a life where everyone wanted something from him. Hence the anger issues, Sarah noted. "Former anger issues," Alexander corrected with a wry smile. "Dr. Michaels says I'm making progress." By the time he walked her to her apartment door, something had shifted between them, a connection that felt surprisingly genuine for two people from such different worlds. "I'd like to see you again," Alexander said simply. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that too." Their goodnight kiss was brief but electric, sending a shock of awareness through Sarah that lingered long after Alexander had gone. For the first time in years, she felt a flutter of genuine excitement, the possibility of something new unfolding in her carefully ordered life. What Sarah didn't anticipate was waking up to find herself trending on Twitter. Someone had recognized them at the restaurant and snapped a photo. Billionaire and the Spinster was trending, alongside speculation about who this ordinary woman was and what she could possibly have done to capture the attention of New York's most eligible bachelor. By mid-morning, her sisters had called multiple times. Her mother had sent 14 increasingly frantic texts, and 3 tabloids had reached out for comments. One particularly vicious article, was already speculating that she was his therapist, raising questions about professional ethics. Sarah was still processing this unwelcome intrusion into her private life when her office door burst open without warning. Madison stood there, practically vibrating with excitement, designer handbag swinging from her wrist. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, closing the door behind her. "Alexander Rothschild. Sarah, this is huge." "I have a client coming in 20 minutes, Sarah protested, but Madison was already making herself comfortable on the therapy couch. "Cancel them. This is more important." Madison was already scrolling through her phone. "Olivia's freaking out. Mum's telling everyone at the country club. Dad's researching Alexander's net worth, though we all know it's in the billions." "Oh, for heaven's sake. This changes everything," Madison continued, oblivious to Sarah's discomfort. "You'll need a new wardrobe, obviously. I'll call my stylist, and we should discuss strategy." "Strategy?" Sarah interrupted. "For what?" Madison looked up, genuinely puzzled. "For landing him, of course. This is your chance, Sarah. After all these years of being the odd one out." "Get out," Sarah said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my office. Now." Sarah's voice was steady but firm. "I'm not some charity case who needs to land a wealthy man to validate my existence. If that's what you think of me, then we have nothing to discuss." Madison's expression shifted from confusion to hurt. "I'm just trying to help. You've been alone so long." "I haven't been alone. I've been independent. There's a difference." Sarah opened her door pointedly. "When you figure out what that difference is, we can talk again." After Madison left, Sarah cancelled her appointments for the day, something she'd never done before. The constant buzzing of her phone was driving her mad. Messages from colleagues who'd seen the photos, old friends suddenly reaching out, even the dean of her department checking if there was a situation she should know about. By afternoon, Sarah felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. How had one simple dinner with a man she found interesting, turned into this circus? Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "I'm sorry about the photo. Should have been more discreet. Can I see you tonight? Talk through this?" Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling at his message. "Yes, but somewhere without cameras this time. My place. I'll cook. And I promise, no fancy restaurants, no photographers, just us." Their second date was at Alexander's penthouse, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. To Sarah's surprise, he really did cook for her, revealing unexpected skill in the kitchen. "People assume I have a personal chef," he explained, stirring a risotto that smelled divine. "I do for events, but I like cooking. It's precise, requires focus. Calming." Sarah watched him move confidently around the kitchen, seeing new dimensions to this man she'd initially categorized as just another entitled billionaire. "You're full of surprises." "Good ones, I hope." His smile was boyish, almost shy, so at odds with his public persona that Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "The press is having a field day with us," she mentioned, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Apparently, I'm either a gold digger or casting a spell on you. Possibly both." Alexander rolled his eyes. "I've been the subject of tabloid nonsense for years. You learned to ignore it." "Easy for you to say. My department chair called me in today to discuss professional ethics after someone dug up that you were briefly my patient." Alexander's expression darkened. "That's crossing a line. I'll have my lawyers—" "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "No lawyers, no threats. That just fuels the fire. I handled it professionally, explained the timeline, and that's that. But it does raise a good point. Maybe this is moving too fast. The optics are complicated." Alexander set down his spoon and turned to face her fully. "Do you care about optics, Sarah? Really? Because the woman I've gotten to know doesn't seem particularly concerned with appearances." "I care about my professional reputation," she countered. "And I care about not becoming tabloid fodder. I've spent my life building credibility." "And I respect that," Alexander said, his voice softening. "But at some point you have to decide what matters more. Other people's opinions or your own happiness. Says the billionaire who doesn't have to worry about paying rent." Alexander acknowledged this with a nod. "Fair point. My privilege insulates me in ways yours doesn't. So tell me what you want. If you want to step back, we will. No pressure, no expectations." His willingness to follow her lead, to actually listen instead of imposing his will, reminded Sarah why she'd been drawn to him in the first place. Beyond the wealth and the intensity was a man learning to put others' needs alongside his own, a rarity in his world and frankly in hers. After dinner they talked for hours, moving from politics to philosophy to personal stories. Sarah found herself sharing things she rarely discussed, her insecurities about measuring up to her sisters, her occasional loneliness, her fear that she might have missed her chance at a family of her own. "Do you regret your choices?" Alexander asked, his hand warm around hers on the couch. Sarah considered the question carefully. "No. I regret feeling like I had to choose. Career or relationship, independence or partnership, as if a woman can't have both." "You can have both," Alexander said simply, "if that's what you want." When he kissed her goodnight this time, there was nothing brief about it. Sarah found herself responding with unexpected intensity, all her carefully constructed boundaries momentarily forgotten in the rush of genuine connection. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened, though not without complications. The press eventually moved on to newer scandals. Though Sarah still occasionally found herself the subject of scrutiny, her relationship with her sisters remained strained, with Madison's attempts at reconciliation hampered by her inability to understand why Sarah had been offended in the first place. "I was just trying to help," she insisted during an awkward lunch. "Connor knows people who could really advance your career with the right introductions." "My career is doing just fine without Connor's connections," Sarah replied. "I'm one of the youngest tenured professors in my department's history." "Yes, but imagine what you could do with proper backing. Alexander must have incredible contacts." Sarah set down her fork. "Madison, I'm not using Alexander for his contacts. I'm dating him because I enjoy his company." "Of course, but why not take advantage of the opportunities?" Madison seemed genuinely puzzled. "That's what these relationships are for." "No, that's what your relationships are for," Sarah corrected. "Some of us actually value connection over advancement." The barb hit harder than Sarah intended. Madison's face fell, genuine hurt flashing in her eyes. "You think my marriage is just about social climbing?" Sarah immediately regretted her words. "I'm sorry, that was unfair." "But that's what you think, isn't it?" Madison pressed. "That Olivia and I married for money and status." "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that we all make different choices for different reasons. I've tried to respect yours. I'd appreciate the same courtesy." Madison nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. "You really like him, don't you? It's not about his money at all." "I really do," Sarah admitted. "He's nothing like I expected." "Well," Madison said, making a visible effort, "then I'm happy for you. And I'm sorry if I made you feel like a charity case. That wasn't my intention. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start." Sarah left lunch feeling like maybe, just maybe, her family might eventually see her relationship, and by extension her, in a new light. Alexander, for his part, was continuing his own journey of growth. His sessions with Dr. Michaels had helped him develop healthier coping mechanisms for stress. He'd reconciled with several board members he'd previously alienated. He'd even reached out to his estranged younger brother, taking the first tentative steps toward healing a rift that had existed for nearly a decade. "It's different," he explained to Sarah one evening as they sat on his terrace, watching the lights of the city. "Seeing relationships as something to nurture rather than liabilities to manage." "You're learning the difference between transactions and connections," Sarah observed. "I had a good teacher," he replied, squeezing her hand. As their relationship approached the 6-month mark, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Her lease was coming up for renewal, and Alexander had casually suggested she consider moving in with him. "You spend most nights here anyway," he pointed out, "and Freud seems to have claimed my reading chair as his territory." The orange cat in question was indeed sprawled across Alexander's expensive furniture, shedding contentedly on what was probably a $1,000 cushion. "It's a big step," Sarah hesitated. "I've never lived with anyone before. I value my independence." "You'd still have that," Alexander assured her. "I'm not asking you to give up your identity or your space. We could renovate the East Wing into your private office and retreat. I just like having you here. The penthouse feels like a home when you're in it." The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep inside Sarah. For a man who had spent his life in emotional isolation, this was no small confession. Before she could respond, her phone rang, her mother, calling for their weekly check-in. Sarah excused herself to take the call on the balcony. "Sarah, darling, wonderful news." Elizabeth's voice trilled through the speaker. "The Hendersons have invited us all to their annual gala next month. You'll bring Alexander, of course?" Sarah sighed. Ever since her relationship with Alexander had become public, her mother had been insufferable, dropping his name into every conversation, suddenly taking an interest in Sarah's life after years of thinly veiled disappointment. "I'll have to check his schedule, Mum." "Do. It's black tie, of course. Olivia's already ordered a Valentino for the occasion. Perhaps Alexander could help you find something suitable." The implication was clear. Sarah couldn't be trusted to dress herself appropriately. Some things never changed. "I'm perfectly capable of choosing my own dress, Mom." "Of course, dear. It's just that these events have photographers, and with your position now as Alexander's companion, there are certain expectations." Sarah closed her eyes, counting to 10 silently. "I'm his girlfriend, Mom, not his companion. And I've been attending academic galas for years. I know how formal events work. Academic events aren't quite the same as social ones, darling. The standards are different." Before Sarah could formulate a response that wouldn't involve regrettable language, Alexander appeared beside her, quietly taking the phone from her hand. "Mrs. Bennett? Alexander Rothschild here. Yes, lovely to speak with you too." He winked at Sarah as he smoothly navigated her mother's effusive greeting. "I wanted to let you know that Sarah and I would be delighted to attend the Henderson Gala, and if you don't mind, I've already arranged for Sarah's dress. My friend Valentina at Dior has created something special just for her." He paused, listening to Elizabeth's response. "Yes, exactly. Sarah has impeccable taste, so naturally she chose something understated, yet elegant. You know your daughter. Substance over spectacle, always." Sarah watched in amazement as Alexander deftly flattered her mother, while simultaneously defending Sarah's choices, ending the call with promises to schedule lunch soon. "You didn't have to do that," Sarah said when he hung up. "And I don't need a custom Dior dress. I know I didn't have to, I wanted to, and the dress is already made. Valentina's been pestering me for an opportunity to design for you since she saw our photo in Vanity Fair. She thinks you have, quote, glorious bone structure that's wasted on off the rack." "That's ridiculous." "That's fashion," Alexander countered with a smile. "But if you'd rather choose something else, the dress can be donated. No pressure." Sarah shook her head, bemused by this man who could casually mention custom designer gowns, yet understood her discomfort with ostentation. "You're a contradiction, Alexander Rothschild." "Is that a bad thing?" "No," she decided. "It's actually one of the things I love about you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, their first mention of love, unplanned and unguarded. Sarah froze, suddenly vulnerable in a way she hadn't intended. Alexander's expression softened, his eyes holding hers with uncharacteristic gentleness. "I love you too, Sarah. Have for months. Been waiting for the right moment to say it. And this is it? After my mother's phone call about gala attire?" He laughed. "Perfect timing has never been my strong suit." Sarah stepped into his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Ask me again," she whispered. "Ask you what?" "About moving in. Ask me again." Alexander pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Sarah Bennett, would you consider sharing your life and living space with a reformed workaholic who loves you exactly as you are?" Sarah smiled, years of guarding her independence giving way to the simple joy of choosing connection. "Yes, but Freud gets to keep the reading chair." "I wouldn't dream of challenging his territorial claim," Alexander agreed solemnly. "The cat outranks me. I've accepted this." As they sealed the agreement with a kiss, Sarah realized that for all her fears about losing herself in this relationship, the opposite had happened. With Alexander, she had found parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. Joy, spontaneity, passion. Not because he had changed her, but because he had created a space where she felt safe enough to expand beyond the careful boundaries she'd constructed around her life. It wasn't perfect, nothing real ever was, but it was genuine. And after a lifetime of being judged for not fitting the mold, that authenticity was the most precious gift of all. The Henderson Gala arrived on a crisp October evening, the kind of night where Manhattan seemed to sparkle with possibility. Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in Alexander's, no, their bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman reflected back at her. The Dior gown was a masterpiece of understated elegance, deep emerald silk that complemented her hazel eyes, cut to flatter her figure without being ostentatious. Her chestnut hair was swept into a sophisticated updo, and the simple diamond earrings Alexander had given her. Just borrowing them, she'd insisted. Consider them on permanent loan, he'd replied, caught the light with every movement. Alexander appeared behind her, impeccable in his tuxedo. His eyes met hers in the reflection, appreciation evident in his gaze. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Sarah admitted. "Like any moment someone's going to realize I don't belong in clothes this expensive." Alexander turned her to face him. "You belong anywhere you choose to be, Sarah. The dress is just fabric. You're the one who gives it significance." His unwavering confidence in her was still something Sarah was adjusting to, the way he saw her not as she appeared to others, but as she truly was. It made her feel both seen and cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. "You know," she said, straightening his bow tie, "for someone who couldn't express emotions 3 months ago, you've become surprisingly insightful." "I had an excellent therapist," he quipped. "Very thorough." "Former therapist," she corrected with a smile. "Very former," he agreed, kissing her lightly. "Now are you ready to face the wolves of high society? I promise to fend them off if they get too close. I've handled faculty politics for years. How different can this be?" Alexander's laugh suggested she was in for a rude awakening. The Henderson mansion on Fifth Avenue was illuminated like a beacon, limousines disgorging the elite of New York society onto its marble steps. As Alexander guided her through the entrance, his hand warm against the small of her back, Sarah felt the weight of curious stares from all directions. "Alexander, darling." A woman in her 60s, dripping in diamonds, descended upon them. "We've missed you at the last 3 charity auctions. The Foundation's coffers are suffering without your generous bids." "Mrs. Astor," Alexander greeted her with practiced charm. "May I introduce Dr. Sarah Bennett?" Sarah Victoria Astor chairs the Metropolitan Museum's Acquisition Committee. "Dr. Bennett," Mrs. Astor assessed Sarah with keen eyes that missed nothing. "Psychology, isn't it? At Columbia, your paper on trauma response in high achievers was quite illuminating." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You've read my work? I make it a point to know about people who capture attention in my circle," Mrs. Astor replied with a cryptic smile, "especially when they're as unexpected as you." Before Sarah could determine if this was a compliment or an insult, Mrs. Astor had moved on, leaving her slightly dazed. "First blood drawn," Alexander murmured in her ear. "You survived admirably." Was that approval or reconnaissance? "Both. Victoria doesn't waste time on people she finds boring. Consider yourself interesting enough to investigate further." The evening continued in similar fashion. Introductions to people whose names Sarah recognized from financial pages and society columns, veiled assessments disguised as small talk, the occasional genuine connection amid the social chess game. Sarah was at the bar waiting for drinks when she overheard a conversation from a nearby group. Obviously a phase. Men like Alexander always return to type eventually. "How long do you give it? 3 months?" "She's pretty enough in a bookish way, but hardly his usual style." "Please. He'll be back with models and socialites by Christmas. This is clearly some sort of midlife crisis dating the intellectual." Sarah froze, the words hitting her like physical blows. These were the unspoken thoughts she'd been fighting since their relationship began, that she was somehow temporary, an interesting diversion before Alexander returned to women who fit more naturally into his world. I'd say his usual style was spectacularly unsuccessful, considering none of those relationships lasted. Alexander's voice cut through the gossip, cool and precise. The group turned, faces flushing as they realized he'd overheard everything. "Alexander, we were just demonstrating why New York society is renowned for its gracious manners," he suggested with deadly pleasantness. How illuminating. He took the drinks from the bartender and returned to Sarah's side, guiding her away from the mortified group. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said quietly. "It's nothing I haven't thought myself," Sarah admitted. "They're not entirely wrong. I am different from your usual companions." "Yes, you are," Alexander agreed, stopping in a quiet corner. "You're intelligent, genuine, and completely unimpressed by the superficial trappings that most people in this room spend their lives pursuing. which is precisely why I love you." The simple declaration, spoken without drama or qualification, silenced Sarah's doubts more effectively than any elaborate reassurance could have. Their moment of privacy was interrupted by an unwelcome voice. "Sarah, there you are. Mum's been looking everywhere for you." Madison approached in a flurry of designer silk and expertly applied makeup, Connor trailing behind her with a bored expression that brightened considerably at the sight of Alexander. "Alexander, just the man I wanted to see," Connor said, immediately shifting into networking mode. "That Westbrook acquisition was genius. Any chance I could pick your brain about—" "Perhaps another time," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "I promised Sarah a dance." Connor's face fell slightly, but he recovered quickly. Of course, rain check?" As Alexander led her toward the dance floor, Sarah whispered, "There's no dancing happening yet." "There will be by the time we get there," he replied confidently. Sure enough, as if on cue, the orchestra began playing a waltz. "Did you plan that?" Sarah asked, impressed despite herself as he guided her into a perfect frame. "I may have made a small request earlier," Alexander admitted. "I wanted at least one moment tonight where you weren't being scrutinized or interrogated." As they moved across the floor, Sarah was acutely aware of the eyes following them, her mother's proud gaze, her sister's contrasting expressions of envy and assessment, the society matrons evaluating her worthiness, the business associates measuring Alexander's apparent happiness. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured. "Let them," Alexander replied simply. "All that matters is what's happening right here." In his arms, Sarah found herself believing him, that the opinions swirling around them were inconsequential compared to the genuine connection they'd built. It was a moment of perfect clarity amid the social chaos, a reminder of why she'd taken the risk of opening her carefully guarded heart to this complex, difficult, wonderful man. The spell was broken by a commotion near the entrance. Flashbulbs erupted as a latecomer arrived, a stunning woman in a daring red gown that seemed designed to maximize exposure of her perfect figure. "Isn't that Sophia Devereaux?" Sarah asked, recognizing the supermodel from magazines. "Your ex?" Alexander's expression tightened imperceptibly. "Yes, I wasn't aware she was invited." "She wasn't." Victoria Astor materialized beside them, disapproval radiating from every pore. Elaine Henderson is beside herself. "Apparently Sophia arrived with some tech billionaire who was added to the list last minute." As if sensing their attention, Sophia looked across the room, her gaze locking with Alexander's. A calculated smile spread across her perfect features, and she began making her way toward them with the determined grace of a predator. "Alexander, darling," she purred upon reaching them, air-kissing his cheeks. "It's been an age. You're looking settled." The slight emphasis on the last word made its implication clear. Sophia turned to Sarah, assessing her with a dismissive glance. "And you must be the therapist. How fascinating that Alexander's finally seeking help. Lord knows I suggested it often enough." "Dr. Sarah Bennett," Sarah replied evenly, extending her hand with professional courtesy. "And I'm not Alexander's therapist. That would be unethical, given our personal relationship." Sophia's perfect eyebrows arched. "Personal? How quaint." "Alexander doesn't do personal, darling. He does convenient and temporary." Before either could respond, photographers appeared, cameras flashing as they captured the tableau. The billionaire, his new girlfriend, and his supermodel ex in an apparent standoff. "Perfect timing," Sophia murmured, striking a pose that ensured she would be the focal point of every shot. Nothing like a little drama to keep one's name in circulation. Alexander's jaw tightened. But before he could speak, Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm, a gesture reminiscent of their therapy sessions that didn't go unnoticed by Sophia. "Ms. Devereaux," Sarah said pleasantly, "I understand the impulse to create artificial drama for publicity purposes. It's actually a fascinating psychological phenomenon, the need to manufacture conflict when one's relevance is waning. I'd be happy to recommend some literature on the subject if you're interested." Sophia's smile froze, her eyes narrowing at the perfectly delivered analysis. Victoria Astor, who had lingered nearby, didn't bother disguising her delighted chuckle. "I see why you keep her around, Alexander," Sophia said tightly. "She's amusing, in a pedantic sort of way." "I keep her around," Alexander replied, his voice carrying just enough to ensure nearby guests could hear, Because she's the most genuine person in a room typically filled with people playing parts rather than being themselves, present company included. Sophia flushed but recovered quickly. Well, enjoy your authenticity. I'm sure it's very refreshing. For now. With a final toss of her perfect hair, she sauntered away, immediately attaching herself to her tech billionaire companion. Well played, Dr. Bennett, Victoria approved. Perhaps there's hope for these gatherings yet. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself increasingly at the center of attention, not as Alexander's curious accessory, but as a person of interest in her own right. Victoria Astor introduced her to the chairman of New York Presbyterian Hospital, who was keenly interested in her research on trauma response. A publishing magnate discussed the possibility of a popular book on psychological resilience. Even Sophia's dramatic entrance had somehow elevated Sarah's status, her composed handling of the situation earning respect in a world that valued social savoir-faire above almost everything. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. Kicking off her painful designer heels, she collapsed onto the sofa with a sigh of relief. "So," Alexander said, loosening his bow tie as he sat beside her. "Still think academic politics are more challenging?" Sarah laughed. "Different playing field, same basic game, though I admit the stakes feel higher when you're being photographed for page 6. "You were magnificent," he said, genuine admiration in his voice, "especially with Sophia. I've never seen her retreat so quickly." "Professional training," Sarah demurred. "I deal with defensive personalities daily." "It was more than that," Alexander insisted. "You didn't try to compete on her terms. You remained authentically yourself, which made her theatrics look exactly like what they were, desperate attention-seeking." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, suddenly overcome with the emotional toll of the evening. "It's exhausting, though, being constantly evaluated, having to prove I belong in your world." "You don't have to prove anything," Alexander said firmly. "And it's not my world versus yours anymore. We're building our own." The sentiment was beautiful but naive. Sarah knew that the divide between their backgrounds, their social circles, their very ways of moving through the world couldn't simply be wished away. Yet Alexander's unwavering belief that they could create something new together was one of the things she loved most about him. His ability to envision possibilities beyond conventional limitations. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The simplicity of dating women who already fit seamlessly into your life. No awkward introductions, no society gossip, no need to explain basic things like why some events require 4 different forks." Alexander considered the question carefully, recognizing its importance. "I miss the superficial convenience sometimes," he admitted. "But what I've gained with you, real connection, genuine understanding, the freedom to be myself without performance, is worth 1,000 society galas." He tilted her chin up gently. "The question is, do you miss the simplicity of your life before me, before paparazzi and socialites and the burden of dating someone with my complications?" It was Sarah's turn for honest reflection. "Sometimes," she acknowledged, "I miss my anonymity. The freedom to grade papers in a coffee shop without ending up on social media. The simplicity of relationships with clearer boundaries." Alexander nodded, accepting her truth without defensiveness. "And is it worth it? This complicated reality we've created?" Sarah smiled, reaching up to trace the worry line between his brows. "Absolutely. You're worth every complication, Alexander Rothschild." The relief in his eyes revealed a vulnerability he rarely showed, the lingering insecurity that beneath his wealth and power he might not be enough just as himself. It was this vulnerability, this willingness to let her see behind his carefully constructed facade, that had captured Sarah's heart from the beginning. In the weeks that followed, their relationship settled into a rhythm that somehow balanced their different worlds. Sarah maintained her teaching schedule and private practice, refusing Alexander's suggestion that she could scale back if she wanted. "I love my work," she'd explained. "It's part of who I am." Alexander, meanwhile, had begun implementing changes at Rothschild Investments, more reasonable hours for staff, a comprehensive wellness program, even a daycare center for employees with children. "Your influence," he acknowledged when Sarah commented on the transformation. "I'm trying to build a company based on values beyond just profit margins." Their personal life blended their different preferences, quiet evenings at home with takeout and Netflix, alongside the occasional high-profile event where Alexander's presence was required. Sarah had grown more comfortable in his social circle, developing a particular friendship with Victoria Astor, who appreciated her intellectual perspective on issues the philanthropic community faced. Yet beneath the surface harmony, tension still simmered, particularly with Sarah's family. Her sisters oscillated between fawning over Alexander's wealth and resenting Sarah's newfound social status. Their mother had become insufferable, dropping Alexander's name into every conversation and taking credit for Sarah's successful match as if she'd orchestrated it. The breaking point came during a family dinner at her parents' home, where Madison's husband Connor had too much to drink and began pressing Alexander for investment advice with increasing aggression. "The Williams media portfolio is primed for expansion," Connor insisted, his words slightly slurred. "All we need is a strategic partner. Someone with your resources could triple their investment within 18 months. "I appreciate the suggestion," Alexander replied diplomatically, "but Rothschild Investments has a policy against entering business arrangements with family connections." Connor's expression darkened. "That's convenient. Good enough to date Sarah, but not good enough to do business with her family." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sarah's father cleared his throat. "Connor, perhaps this isn't the time." "No, let's be honest for once," Connor interrupted. "Everyone knows why Alexander's with Sarah. She's his respectable phase, the serious girlfriend to cleanse his playboy image before he takes the company public next year. Smart strategy, really." "Connor!" Madison gasped, but the damage was done. Alexander's expression had turned to ice, reminiscent of the man Sarah had first met in her office months ago. "I think we should leave," he said quietly. "Alexander!" Sarah's mother began, clearly panicked about the social disaster unfolding at her dinner table. "Connor's just had too much wine. He doesn't mean—" "He meant exactly what he said," Alexander cut her off coolly. "And he's not the only one thinking it. I've just been waiting to see which of you would say it aloud first." He stood, extending his hand to Sarah. "Shall we?" The drive home was silent, Alexander's knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah could feel the anger radiating from him, not directed at her but at the situation, at the persistent belief that their relationship must be a transaction rather than a genuine connection. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "My family—" "Don't apologize for them," Alexander interrupted, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Their behavior isn't your responsibility." "But it affects you, affects us," Sarah countered. "And it's not just them. The whole world seems determined to find an ulterior motive for our relationship." Alexander pulled into the underground garage of their building, shutting off the engine but making no move to exit the car. In the dim lighting, his profile was sharp, tension visible in every line of his body. "Does it matter?" he asked finally. "What they think?" "It shouldn't," Sarah admitted. "But sometimes I wonder if they're right. Not about your motives, but about the viability of this. Us. We come from such different worlds, Alexander. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part I was never meant for." Alexander turned to her, his expression softening. "Sarah, do you remember what you told me in our third session, when I was complaining about board members who didn't respect my vision for the company?" Sarah thought back. "I said that other people's opinions of you aren't your reality unless you choose to make them so." "Exactly." He took her hand, his touch gentle despite the lingering tension in his frame. "We get to define what this relationship is. Not your family, not society columnists, not my ex-girlfriends, just us." "And what is it to you?" Sarah asked, suddenly needing to hear him articulate what she meant to him beyond the casual "I love yous" they'd exchanged. Alexander considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "You're my reality check," he said finally. "The person who calls me on my bullshit, but still sees the good in me. The woman who makes me want to be better not because you demand it, but because you deserve it. You're the first person I've ever been with who wants me for myself, not what I can provide." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "And you," she replied softly, "are the first man who's ever seen me completely. My ambitions, my insecurities, my unconventional choices, and loved all of it. Not despite who I am, but because of it." In the quiet of the car, surrounded by the concrete walls of the garage, they reached a new understanding, that perhaps the very differences that caused friction were also what made their connection so valuable. They were challenging each other, expanding each other's worlds, creating something that neither could have built alone. "We should go up," Sarah finally said. "Freud will be wondering where his dinner is." Alexander smiled, the tension finally breaking. "The cat does rule our household schedule, doesn't he?" "One of us has to," Sarah quipped, earning a genuine laugh from Alexander as they headed for the elevator. Later that night, as they lay in bed with Freud purring contentedly between them, Sarah found herself thinking about perfection, the kind her sisters had always pursued, the kind society magazines celebrated, the kind that looked flawless on paper but often crumbled under pressure. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "my sisters' marriages look perfect on paper. Right backgrounds, right connections, right appearances, but I'm beginning to think they're both deeply unhappy." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" "Little things. The way Madison tenses when Connor touches her. How Olivia never talks about her husband except in terms of his achievements. Their perfect Instagram lives that bear no resemblance to reality." "Appearances versus substance," Alexander observed. "A common theme in my world, too. That's what I don't want for us," Sarah said firmly. "I'd rather have messy authenticity than perfect pretense." Alexander pulled her closer, careful not to disturb the territorial cat. "Then that's what we'll build, Dr. Bennett. A gloriously imperfect reality." As Sarah drifted toward sleep, she realized that perhaps this was the true difference between her and her sisters. Not that they had found perfect marriages while she remained single, but that they had settled for the appearance of perfection while she had held out for something real. And in the most unlikely of places, with the most unexpected of men, she had finally found it. The year that followed brought changes neither Sarah nor Alexander could have anticipated. Their relationship deepened, weathering public scrutiny, family drama, and the inevitable adjustments of two independent people learning to build a life together. Sarah's private practice thrived, her research gained recognition in academic circles, and she found herself increasingly invited to speak at conferences, on her own merits, not as Alexander Rothschild's girlfriend. Alexander, meanwhile, had transformed Rothschild Investments from a ruthlessly profit-driven enterprise to a company recognized for both its financial success and its progressive workplace policies. The board members who had once communicated with him through intermediaries now sought his direct input, appreciating the more measured leadership style he had developed. Their personal lives had found a comfortable rhythm. They divided their time between Alexander's penthouse and a weekend house they'd purchased together in the Berkshires, a compromise between his desire for luxury and her preference for simplicity. The rustic, elegant farmhouse had become their sanctuary, a place where they could simply be themselves away from the scrutiny of New York society. Sarah's relationship with her family had evolved as well, in ways that surprised everyone. Madison had filed for divorce from Connor after discovering his third affair, and had moved temporarily into Sarah's old apartment, which they had kept as a pied-à-terre for late work nights. The crisis had brought the sisters closer, with Madison finally seeing beyond the lifestyle differences that had separated them for so long. "I've been such an idiot," Madison had confessed one evening, nursing a glass of wine in Sarah's kitchen. "I thought I had everything figured out. Marry rich, look perfect, win at life, and look where it got me." "You're not an idiot," Sarah had replied gently. "You followed the path that seemed right to you at the time. We all did." "But you were smart enough to question it," Madison pointed out. "While I was judging you for being single, you were building a life with actual meaning. And now look at you. You have both the career and the relationship. You didn't compromise." Sarah had smiled at her sister's newfound insight. "I got lucky, and it hasn't been without complications." Indeed, the complications continued, particularly from Alexander's world. His father's health had deteriorated, forcing a reconciliation that was painful but necessary. The old man, once so formidable, now seemed diminished in his hospital bed, his harsh judgment softened by mortality. "You've done well," Harold Rothschild had told his son during their last meaningful conversation. "Better than I expected when you took over. The company is stronger, more respected." Alexander, who had spent his life seeking his father's approval, found the words bitter-sweet in their timing. "I had good people around me," he replied, glancing at Sarah, who stood quietly by the door. The old man's gaze followed his son's. "You're Dr. Bennett. Not what I would have chosen for you. But then, my choices weren't always the best either." It was as close to a blessing as Harold Rothschild could manage, an acknowledgement that perhaps his son's path, different as it was from his own, had merit. When Harold passed a week later, Alexander found himself in the unfamiliar territory of grief, complicated, messy, and resistant to his usual problem-solving approach. Sarah had been his anchor, understanding the complex emotions of losing someone with whom his relationship had been so fraught. "It's okay to feel conflicted," she'd assured him. "Grief isn't linear or logical, especially when the relationship was complicated." Through the funeral arrangements, the business transitions, the flood of public condolences from people who had barely known his father, Alexander had relied on Sarah's steady presence. Her professional training gave her insight into his emotional process, but it was her love that provided the safe space he needed to experience his grief authentically, rather than performing the expected role of stoic heir. Now, nearly a year into their relationship, they found themselves back where it had all started, preparing for another high society gala, though this time for Alexander's foundation, supporting educational initiatives for underprivileged youth. "Different from last year, isn't it?" Sarah observed as they dressed in their bedroom. "No more wondering if I can survive your world." Alexander smiled, watching her fasten a pair of sapphire earrings he'd given her for her 39th birthday. "You more than survived it. You conquered it on your own terms." It was true. Sarah had found her place not by conforming to society's expectations, but by remaining authentically herself, intelligent, compassionate, occasionally awkward in designer gowns, but always genuine. To everyone's surprise, this authenticity had made her something of a favorite among certain influential circles, particularly those tired of practiced perfection. "Victoria Astor called yesterday," Sarah mentioned, applying her lipstick with practiced ease, a skill she'd developed over the past year of public appearances. "She wants me on the hospital's Psychological Services Advisory Board." "You should do it," Alexander encouraged. "They need someone who understands both the academic and practical sides of mental health care." Sarah nodded, having already decided to accept. It was one of many ways she'd found to integrate her professional expertise with the opportunities Alexander's world provided, leveraging privilege for meaningful impact rather than social status. As they prepared to leave for the gala, Alexander seemed uncharacteristically nervous, checking his pocket repeatedly and clearing his throat more than usual. "Are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked, concerned. "We can make an appearance and leave early if you're not up to a full evening." "I'm fine," he assured her quickly, "just thinking about some things." At the event held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Sarah moved with newfound confidence through the crowd. She greeted Victoria Astor warmly, discussed educational policy with the mayor, and graciously deflected a society columnist's probing questions about her relationship with practiced ease. "You've come a long way from the woman who wanted to hide at the Henderson Gala," observed Olivia, who had appeared at her elbow during a quiet moment. Her sister looked as elegant as ever, though Sarah detected a new strain around her eyes. "Practice makes perfect," Sarah replied, "or at least less awkward." Olivia smiled tightly. "You make it look so natural now. The girlfriend of New York's most eligible bachelor. Except he's not eligible anymore, is he? Not with the way he looks at you." There was something in her tone that caught Sarah's attention, a hint of wistfulness beneath the polished exterior. "How are things with James?" she asked gently, referring to Olivia's surgeon husband. Olivia glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Picture perfect," she said with bitter emphasis on the first word. "He's never home. I manage his social calendar and serve as hostess for his colleagues, and we haven't had a real conversation in months. But the Christmas card will look fabulous." The admission, so uncharacteristic for Olivia, who guarded the appearance of marital bliss fiercely, stunned Sarah. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "Have you considered counseling?" Olivia laughed humorlessly. "James doesn't believe in therapy, says doctors make the worst patients." She took a sip of champagne. "I used to envy Madison for having the more attentive husband. Turns out he was attentive to everyone except her." "It's never too late to make changes," Sarah suggested carefully, aware of the delicate territory she was entering. Madison's doing better now, finding herself again. Is she? Olivia looked genuinely curious. I've been avoiding her, honestly, afraid divorce might be contagious. Before Sarah could respond, Alexander appeared, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Sorry to interrupt, he said, nodding politely to Olivia. Sarah, could I borrow you for a moment? There's something I need to show you on the rooftop garden. Now? Sarah asked, surprised. The evening's program was due to start soon. It's important, he insisted, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes that Sarah couldn't refuse. Excuse me, she said to Olivia, who waved them off with a knowing smile that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. Alexander guided her through the museum to a private elevator, then up to the rooftop garden that had been closed to other guests. As they emerged, Sarah gasped softly. The space had been transformed with thousands of tiny lights, creating a magical ceiling of stars above the Manhattan skyline. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and in the center of the garden stood a table with a single rose and a bottle of champagne. Alexander, what is all this? Sarah asked, though a part of her already knew, had perhaps been waiting for this moment without consciously acknowledging it. He led her to the center of the garden, visibly nervous in a way she'd never seen before. This was not the confident CEO, not the polished society figure, but simply Alexander, the man who had first shown her glimpses of vulnerability in her therapy office over a year ago. I had a whole speech prepared, he began, taking her hands in his. About how you've transformed my life, how you've taught me what real connection means, how I never thought I'd find someone who sees me for who I am rather than what I possess. Sarah felt her heart racing as Alexander reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. But the truth is simpler than that, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. I love you, Sarah Bennett. I love your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, your stubborn independence. I love that you never let me get away with anything. I love who I am when I'm with you. He knelt before her, Alexander Rothschild, who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, on one knee in an act of beautiful vulnerability. I don't want a perfect marriage that looks good in photographs, he said softly. I want a real partnership with you, messy and challenging and absolutely worth it. Will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a ring, not the massive diamond she might have expected, but an elegant emerald surrounded by small diamonds in a vintage setting that perfectly matched her aesthetic rather than showcasing his wealth. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by how far they'd both come from that first meeting in her office. Yes, she whispered. Absolutely yes. The relief and joy that transformed Alexander's face was its own kind of magic. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, the quartet shifted into a celebratory piece, and Sarah realized with a start that they weren't alone. From the shadows stepped their closest friends and family. Her parents, Madison, Olivia, Victoria Astor, Alexander's brother, and several others who had become important in their shared life. You planned all this? Sarah asked, amazed. With a little help, Alexander admitted, gesturing to Madison, who approached with a tearful smile. He asked for my help choosing the ring, Madison explained, embracing her sister. Said I was the only one who truly understood your style. We've been planning this for weeks, Olivia added, joining them. It's been torture keeping it secret. Their mother, typically focused on appearances, surprised Sarah by whispering, He loves you for who you are. That's all I've ever truly wanted for you, Sarah. The celebration continued late into the night, the Foundation Gala becoming an impromptu engagement party as news spread throughout the event. Sarah found herself in a whirlwind of congratulations, champagne toasts, and moments of quiet joy amid the social chaos. Near midnight, Victoria Astor approached her with a knowing smile. Well done, Dr. Bennett. You've accomplished what many thought impossible, capturing Alexander Rothschild's heart completely. I never set out to capture anything, Sarah replied honestly. Precisely why you succeeded, Victoria said wisely. Authenticity always triumphs over calculation in matters of the heart. Remember that when the wedding planners start pushing for extravagances you don't want. As the evening wound down, Sarah found a quiet moment with Alexander on the rooftop. The city lights spread before them like earthbound stars. Happy? He asked simply, his arm around her waist. Beyond words, she replied. though I'm already dreading the wedding planning. My mother will want the plaza, 300 guests and coverage in Vogue. And what do you want? Alexander asked, his focus, as always, on her preferences rather than expectations. Sarah considered the question. Something small, meaningful, just the people who matter to us in a place that feels significant. The Berkshire's house, Alexander suggested, in the garden, limited guest list, no press. Your board members will be disappointed to miss the social event of the season, Sarah teased. They'll survive, Alexander replied dryly. This isn't about them. It's about us, building the foundation for the life we want, not the one others expect. As they stood together overlooking the city, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From therapist and patient, to unlikely couple, to partners planning a future together. It hadn't been perfect. There had been arguments, adjustments, moments of doubt and fear on both sides. Cultural differences, family tensions, public scrutiny, all had tested their commitment. Yet somehow, those very challenges had strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. They had learned to navigate each other's worlds without losing themselves, to create something new that honored both their differences and their shared values. What are you thinking? Alexander asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Sarah smiled up at the man who had crossed boundaries, upended her carefully ordered life, and given her something she hadn't realized she was missing. Just that sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to exactly where we're supposed to be. Alexander's answering smile reflected the same wonder she felt, that amid all the complexity of their separate worlds, they had found in each other something remarkably simple, the courage to be authentically themselves and the joy of being fully accepted for it. 6 months later, on a perfect summer day, they were married in the garden of their Berkshire's home, surrounded by only their closest family and friends. Sarah wore a simple but elegant gown that felt true to her style rather than a concession to bridal traditions. Alexander had tears in his eyes as he spoke vows that promised partnership rather than possession, growth rather than perfection. Madison served as maid of honor, her newfound confidence evident in the genuine smile she wore throughout the day. She had started her own interior design business, transforming her eye for aesthetics into a creative career rather than just a social asset. Olivia attended alone, having finally initiated the difficult conversations with James that would either save or end their marriage. You inspired me, she told Sarah quietly during the reception, to want something real, not just something that looks good on paper. Sarah's parents, to everyone's surprise, had embraced the intimate celebration wholeheartedly. Your father and I eloped, you know, Elizabeth confided after too much champagne. The big society wedding was my mother's idea. I always regretted not following our own hearts. As Sarah and Alexander shared their first dance as husband and wife, she marveled at how life had circled around. She, who had been labeled the spinster, the family disappointment, had found a love so authentic it had inspired others to question their own compromises. Dr. Rothschild Bennett, Alexander murmured, using the professional name she'd decided to keep. Was that enough of a grand romantic gesture for you? I tried to keep it relatively unembarrassing. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the garden like music. It was perfect, not perfect on paper, but perfect for us. That's all that matters, Alexander replied, bringing her hand to his lips. Though I maintain that your sisters still owe you several more apologies for all those years of condescension. They'll get there, Sarah said confidently. Some people take longer to learn that happiness doesn't come from other people's approval, and some people need a good therapist to figure that out, Alexander added with a teasing grin. Or a good therapist who breaks all her professional rules to date them, Sarah countered. Best ethical violation ever, Alexander declared, pulling her closer as they danced beneath the fairy lights that mimicked the stars above. Not a perfect beginning, perhaps, but a real one. And in the end, that made all the difference. 2 years later, Sarah adjusted her glasses as she reviewed her notes for the keynote speech she would deliver at the opening of the Rothschild Center for Psychological Research at Columbia, Alexander's wedding gift to her now finally complete after 2 years of planning and construction. At 41, Dr. Sarah Rothschild Bennett had expanded her practice to include couples therapy, published a well-received book on authentic relationships, and maintained her teaching position while directing the new research center. She had found the balance she once thought impossible, meaningful work alongside deep personal connection. Alexander entered her home office. They divided their time between his penthouse and her beloved apartment, unwilling to fully give up either space, carrying their 6-month-old daughter, Emma. "Someone wants to wish Mommy good luck," he said, passing the smiling baby to Sarah. Sarah breathed in her daughter's sweet scent, still amazed by this tiny person who had her eyes and Alexander's determined chin. The decision to have a child had not been made lightly. Both had questioned whether they were ready for parenthood, whether they could balance their demanding careers with family life, whether they would repeat the patterns of their own parents. But like everything in their relationship, they had approached the challenge with honest communication and a willingness to create their own path rather than following convention. Alexander had scaled back his hours at the company, implementing a co-CEO model that allowed him more flexibility. Sarah had adjusted her teaching schedule and patient load, but maintained her research and writing, refusing to abandon the professional identity she'd worked so hard to build. "Is Madison still coming to watch her during the speech?" Sarah asked, reluctantly returning Emma to her father's arms. "Already here," Alexander confirmed. "And Olivia's bringing the photographer for the family portrait afterward." The dynamic between the sisters had transformed over time. Madison, now divorced and building a successful design firm, had become one of Sarah's closest confidants, a relationship neither would have predicted 3 years ago. Olivia and James had separated briefly, attended intensive couples therapy, and were cautiously rebuilding a marriage based on genuine partnership rather than social expectation. They had welcomed their first child 2 months after Emma was born, creating a new bond between the sisters as they navigated motherhood together. Sarah's parents had mellowed considerably, their focus shifting from social standing to the simple joy of grandparenthood. Even Alexander's brother, once estranged, had become a regular presence in their lives, finding in Sarah the sister he'd never had, and in Emma the niece he doted on shamelessly. As Sarah gathered her notes and prepared to leave for the center's opening, she caught sight of a framed photo on her desk, taken on that first Henderson gala where she'd felt so out of place. In it, she and Alexander were dancing, oblivious to the cameras, her expression relaxed in a way it never was in public settings. His eyes focused on her, as if she were the only person in the room. "Penny for your thoughts," Alexander said, noticing her pause. "Just thinking about how far we've come," Sarah replied. "From that first session where you thought anger was an appropriate response to incompetence." Alexander laughed, the sound no longer rare as it had been when they first met. "I was a nightmare client." "But worth the ethical dilemma?" Sarah teased, gathering her belongings. As they prepared to leave, the phone rang. Victoria Astor, calling with last-minute advice for Sarah's speech. The elderly socialite had become an unexpected mentor, guiding Sarah through the complexities of wielding influence for positive change rather than social status. "Remember," Victoria instructed, "speak to the impact, not the intentions. These donors need to understand how their money translates to real help for real people." "I've got it covered," Sarah assured her. "The presentation includes data from our pilot programs." "Good girl," Victoria approved. "Alexander, are you listening? Make sure she doesn't downplay the results. Sarah's too modest about her accomplishments." "I'm under strict instructions to be her biggest cheerleader," Alexander confirmed, earning an eye roll from Sarah. As they ended the call and headed for the door, Sarah marveled at how life had unfolded, not according to society's timeline or her family's expectations, but in its own perfect, imperfect way. She had found professional fulfillment alongside personal joy, proving that the either-or choice she'd once believed inevitable was actually a false dichotomy. "Ready to change the world, Dr. Rothschild Bennett?" Alexander asked with the same intense gaze that still made her heart skip. Sarah smiled, taking his free hand while he balanced Emma on his hip, an image so far removed from the angry, isolated man who had first entered her office that it sometimes seemed like a different lifetime. "Already did," she replied. "1 billionaire at a time." His answering laugh was everything she hadn't known she needed until he crashed into her carefully ordered life and turned it gloriously upside down. They walked out together, not the picture-perfect couple from magazines, but something far better. Real partners, facing life's complexities side by side, proving that sometimes the most surprising love stories are the ones that last. The eldest spinster and the most desired billionaire had found something that could never be captured in headlines or social media posts: authentic connection in a world obsessed with perfect appearances. And in the end, that was worth more than any fortune. As they drove toward Columbia University, Emma babbling happily in her car seat, Sarah reached over to squeeze Alexander's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For being perfectly imperfect. With me." His smile, open, genuine, and meant only for her, was all the answer she needed. The end. Dear listener, in the story of Sarah and Alexander, we witness something powerful that speaks to our deepest desires: the courage to remain authentic in a world obsessed with appearances, and the transformative power of being truly seen. Like Sarah, many of us face expectations about what our lives should look like by certain ages. We compare ourselves to others who seem to have achieved the perfect life on paper: the right career, the right relationship, the right possessions, while feeling somehow inadequate for choosing a different path or valuing different things. The truth is that those perfect lives we admire from afar often hide their own struggles, disappointments, and emptiness, just as we saw with Sarah's sisters. The marriages that appeared flawless in photographs were lacking in genuine connection. The social media presence that generated envy was masking profound loneliness. If you haven't yet found romantic love between a man and woman, please don't be disheartened. Love flows through our lives in countless beautiful forms. The deep bond with a lifelong friend who knows your story and stays by your side through every chapter. The protective love of siblings who share your history and hold your secrets. The pure joy in the eyes of grandchildren and nieces and nephews who look up to you with admiration and trust. These loves are no less profound, no less important, no less capable of filling our hearts with purpose and meaning. Remember, too, that love has no expiration date. It's never too late for love to find its way to your door. Some of the most beautiful love stories begin in the autumn or winter seasons of life, when two people bring the wisdom of their experiences, the clarity of knowing who they truly are, and the patience that comes with maturity. These mature loves often have a depth and steadiness that youth cannot match, built not on fleeting passion, but on genuine appreciation for another soul. Your path may not follow the timeline or pattern that society, family, or friends expect. You might be the spinster, the bachelor, the one who prioritized career over relationship, passion over security, or authenticity over appearance. Know that this doesn't make you less worthy of love or happiness. It simply means you've refused to settle for a life that doesn't truly fulfill you. Thank you for listening with your heart and for carrying these words with you. Your journey is uniquely yours, with all its detours and unexpected turns, and it is precisely those unique elements that make your story worth telling. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to support our channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video with someone who needs to believe in love again. From the bottom of our hearts, your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even more beautiful stories full of love, redemption, and unexpected turns. At the end of this video, you'll see another one of our heartfelt stories appear. Click and be surprised by more emotional journeys just like this one.